Industry Season 3. Here's the official synopsis. This is a British-American television drama series, financial drama, that premiered in 2020. It follows a group of young graduates competing for permanent positions at a prestigious investment bank in London, known as Pierpoint. And these young bankers and traders make their way in the financial world in the aftermath of the 2008 collapse. And as we like to do here on the Spun Today Podcast, let's shout out the writers. The show was largely written and created by Mickey Down and Conrad Kay. Additional writers for a handful of episodes were Joseph Charlton, Sam H. Freeman, Kate Verghese, Matthew Barry, and Zara Mirza. Shout out to each and every one of the writers that put this great series together. Season 3 is the last and final series, the series finale. And I've broken down both seasons 1 and season 2, which if you haven't listened to those, feel free to go back and listen to them. It was with the last handful of episodes that I've put out, where I think I got a bit more foundational with the characters in terms of information that I shared. But here for season 3, I'm going to just do kind of a data dump of some of my favorite parts and scenes and things that happened, as I normally do. Starting with Randolph and Mortimer Pierpoint, which were the founders of the Pierpoint Bank. I thought that was a cool nod to the 80s film Trading Places. And the season starts out kind of upside down, backwards. Like we as the viewer don't know how much time has lapsed, what's going on exactly. Eric, his character, Eric Tao, played by Ken Leung, is getting a standing ovation from the C-suite execs. Harper Stern's character, played by Myhala, is completely MIA. Yasmin Karahanani, played by Marissa Abella, she's getting dragged through the media. Kenny Kilbane's character, played by Connor McNeil, is being a dick again and not a shell of himself as he was being in the prior season after he got sober. And it didn't seem like he was back on the sauce or anything. It was just he was getting some of his edge back, if you will. And there's a couple new characters, one of which was Sweet Pea Golightly, played by Miriam Pecci. She was this smart financial girl that was also a TikTok star. Nicole Craig's character, played by Sarah Parrish, makes this poignant point with Robert, which are still sleeping together. But she winds up telling him that we're all just chimps in a hierarchy. And then they're laying out by the pool. It's drizzling. They wind up falling asleep, and then it starts drizzling or raining. And Robert wakes up. She's not really moving. He lifts her off him. She's half on him. And she's fucking dead. Which was a sick scene. Crazy unexpected. Eric winds up firing Kenny instead of Yaz because Bill Adler, his boss, wants him to get rid of somebody to make another cut. And I thought a funny scene, or not a funny scene, but an interesting way that Eric's character framed a climate conference that they were going to was that it's just ESG enough to appease the Democrats and also anti-woke enough to not trigger the Republicans, which I thought was just like an interesting tightrope that banks and industries in general are constantly walking, right? You're playing both sides of the fence. You've seen Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives. And ESG, for the uninitiated within the finance world, stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it's essentially, think of it like you have rating agencies, right? Like Moody's and S&P and Fitch, that rate different businesses, different companies, like AAA rated, A rated, B rated, triple B rated. That's where the term like junk stocks comes from, which essentially are anything rated below a B, I believe, or B and below, or triple C and below, or junk bonds. But think of it in those terms of a rating agency. But ESG there are companies that essentially assign scores, ESG scores, and ratings to companies, not based on their profit and loss and balance sheet and investments and revenues and all the financial stuff, but on those three pillars, those three buckets: ESG, environmental, social, and governance. In the environmental bucket would be things: does this company have a target goal to be carbon neutral by 2045 or 2050 or wherever the goalpost happens to be right now? In their supply chain, do they knowingly have humane practices when it comes to mining cobalt and like conflict minerals? That's the kind of stuff in the E bucket, the environmental bucket. Then you have the social bucket, which I can't think of any examples right now, I'm blanking on it. And then you have the governance bucket, which is, do you have a balance of male and females on the suite seat, on the board of directors, for example? Are you equal opportunity employers? Are you have the sensitivity trainings and diversity trainings, kind of office culture type of things? What is the payout, the severance packages look for? Let's say a CEO just fucks things up badly. Are they able to cash out their shares and get paid a shit ton of money anyway? But anyway, that's what ESG stands for, essentially. And I just liked Eric's framing there, which was that this particular ESG conference, or climate conference rather, was just ESG enough to appease Democrats, which are more for these types of things, and anti-woke enough not to trigger Republicans. So still meant to be financially sound, practical investment in companies and stuff like that would be involved. We also find out that Rishi, we find out in season 3, is spiraling and has a sick gambling addiction, which isn't covered in the prior seasons, but definitely plays into his vibe, the vibe of his character throughout seasons 1 and 2. It was very reminiscent of Adam Sandler's movie Uncut Gems. That was like the type of shit Rishi has been on, and it spills over into work, where he has this huge negative position that is pretty much going to erase all the gains that the entire desk has made that year. And he makes this crazy bet that winds up paying off, like on some Hail Mary last minute type shit, where sterling silver has some once in 27 year rate hike, and that offsets that's in his favor, essentially. So for his huge negative position to actually make sense and pay out, this once in a 27 year occurrence had to happen. And we also find out that Diana, Rishi's wife, played by Emily Barber, has a podcast that actually makes money. And she winds up bailing him out of a big hole that he's in with his bookie. And they kind of have this heart-to-heart, just like cards out on the table moment between the two. And she winds up telling him, she was like, do you even know what a man is? And she's like, a man is how you treat people who expect your love, which I thought was a dope line. And I'll put a pin in that and circle back to those two in a bit. But then moving on in the season, the Lumi IPO winds up failing, crashing afterwards. The CEO cashes out before it does, and he comes from legacy wealth in London. Some backdoor deals were made with the politicians and regulators, etc., etc. Robert, his character is essentially put out there by Pierpoint to take the fall. He and the Lumi CEO wind up going on an ayahuasca retreat, which I thought was funny. We find out through flashback scenes, because the season has a lot of flashbacks just to tie out loose ends and fill in some blanks that we as viewers have. And we find out that Yasmin lets her pops drown on some Phil Collins in the Air Tonight type shit. Harper, we finally find out, is working for this boutique fund, and then winds up leaving that fund with one of the partners of it and starting their own fund. And they together angle a deal that would short the fuck out of Pierpoint and really screw the bank over. And it winds up leading to this great dialogue confrontation between Harper and Yaz, who throughout the series have this love-hate relationship for each other, filled with adoration and respect backstab and belittling at the same time, and true moments of friendship and being there for each other, sprinkled with moments of I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. It's a very contentious relationship. Oh, this was a dope line. The interim CEO of Pierpoint tells the head of Barclays, because they come down pretty much to the wire where the bank is going to implode, essentially. It's going to collapse. It's going to be like Lehman Brothers. And the interim CEO tells Barclays, who's like at the table with them, willing to buy them for pennies on the dollar, buy out the bank. He tells him, so we're just at the mercy of someone else's ambition. And the Barclays CEO replies to him, aren't we always? I thought that was a pretty dope back and forth there. Eric Tao angles with one of the execs who was spearheading the whole ESG push within the bank, which was a colossal failure for them, as it has been for some banks and entities in real life in the financial system. But he angles with her to fuck Bill Adler and pin things on him and position it as it being due to his brain tumor, and that he pretty much positions himself as being the next CFO for whatever the remnants of Pierpoint winds up being, and pivots the idea from letting Barclays buy them for pennies on the dollar to having investors from the Middle East just invest in Pierpoint as is. You know, something that I noticed about Robert's character, Robert, he always had this douchey walk and mannerism to him that I thought was, you know, just the character that Harry Lawty was playing. But I think that that's just Harry's way of being. No disrespect to Harry, but when I saw him in Joker 2, playing the Harvey Dent character there, he had those very similar mannerisms about him and like the same walk. So I don't think that was a character specific to Robert Spearing. Then we see Yaz's character has this opportunity to have all her troubles go away in terms of how she's being portrayed in the press, and legal troubles with her family's estate, and her dad being MIA and then found out to have been dead and drowned. And she could have had everything go away and, you know, be in wealth, which she was always accustomed to being, given how she grew up, by getting with the Loomy guy. That's what the grandfather of the Loomy guy, which again comes from this legacy wealthy family. But then she chose to go with Robert, to be with Robert, who they always had this flirty kind of, they're gonna wind up together type of relationship. They would wind up together at the end, and they do finally sleep together, and it seems they're gonna be like, you know, ride off into the sunset, live happily ever after, and carve out a nice existence and life for themselves. And then you fast forward to the end of that same day, and Henry, which is the Loomy guy, he announces that they're engaged after them two discussed, you know, just being practical about things and about going on in their lives, because that family had the power to just clear her name and from the papers and tabloids, and they owned all the photos that were being used to trash her. And then what's in it for Henry is that she would help, you know, whitewash Henry's corporate failure somehow, and Rob just gets fucked in the end. And there was a scene that was shot pretty interestingly, pretty cool, that I liked, which was when the engagement was announced. They were at this very long, fancy dinner. By long, I mean very long table. Seemed like royalty style dinner. There's a shot of them exchanging looks, Rob and Yaz, and it's like everybody else melts away, and the look from her is essentially saying, I'm sorry, and the look from him is essentially saying that I understand. And then he winds up driving away at the end, and there's a moment where he kind of like smirks and smiles, and in that moment found solace in knowing that he was the one that she truly loved. Like, he took her for her word. They actually said I love you and stuff like that when they slept together, while at the same time knowing that for practical reasons he wouldn't wind up with her. Jesse Bloom, we find out, goes to prison for tax evasion. Bill Adler winds up dying from the cancer tumor. Eric gets fired. in the end and is given a $20 million severance, aka a golden parachute, like what I was mentioning earlier, like the G in ESG. Harper makes a decision to leave the fund that she started with Petra and making a deal with one of those legacy wealth guys, which is Henry's father, great uncle or friend of the family or something like that, who initially backed her and Petra's fund, but he was more of a shady type character. And Harper said that she would run her own short only fund from New York and that she was ready to go home. Then you fast forward some time and Yaz winds up calling Harper to congratulate her on being on Forbes 30 under 30 and to invite her to her wedding. And then we see the invitation list and we see that the Obamas are on there. That's how fancy this family is. We also find out that Rishi, circling back to him and his wife, Rishi is in the hole now. To his bookie, 600,000 pounds. And the bookie winds up paying him a visit and shooting his wife in the head. And then leaves him there. Just freaked the fuck out. So we kind of see how that's going to end. Yaz finally confronts the fact that her dad molested her, which they kind of tease throughout the series, but never fully show or confirm until the moment where she's told that by someone that, you know, that they're sorry for what he did to her, or if he ever did that to her, and she breaks down crying in this moment of like clarity and realization, and then soon after denial. But it definitely explains a lot of how promiscuous her character was and how contentious the relationship was between her and her dad. And there's also, we get a nice amends between Harper and Eric. Between their characters, Harper calls Eric, which was the central mentor-mentee relationship throughout the series. And they kind of made amends. And those two, they were kindred spirits in a way. They were very, very similar people. Sociopathic, very able, very focused, very smart. And they played off of each other very well. And then the series essentially ends with Rob finally coming into his own as a salesman and seemingly locking in a deal for the VC funding for this. It was either like a Silicon Valley startup or this medical startup that was going to make him the CFO of the company if he was able to lock down some VC funding. But yeah, Industry is a dope series. I definitely recommend it. It's a fairly quick watch, being that it's only 3 seasons, and that is the full series, but definitely worth a watch. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure you fine folks will too. And that is my little recap and review of Industry Season 3. Check it out now, streaming on HBO Max.